So it was a request and then upheld to discuss the definitions of atik and arech. Okay, so atik and arech are two levels of, you even call it a world in a way, referred to as keser. It's a level, keser, but it's also really also a world, but not exactly. So just to explain very briefly. We have, as we know, the four worlds of Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. We do not have time in our conversation here to define them, actually, interestingly enough. If we should do that. Just parenthetically, I was thinking that as we continue learning, maybe we'll dedicate one day a week to continuing the series. Right. So maybe every Friday we'll pick something and we'll do it that way, perhaps. So then we'll get back to Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, understanding the four worlds. But for the purposes of our conversation, we're focusing on the highest world, Atzilus. And Atzilus is a divine world. It's going to come up later in Sharich Damunah, closer to chapter 8. And what makes it difficult to understand, or the conundrum of this world, is that it's a godly world. Those two words can be an inherent paradox or contradiction almost. World implies limitation, definition, boundaries, and godly would imply infinite, no definition, and no boundaries. And yet this is the godly world, right? It's the bridge between the infinite and the finite, which is why it's such an important world, and why there's so much talk about it, more than the other worlds in many ways, but also difficult to understand. Okay, so explaining and understanding how we have this bridge is going to come up in chapter 8. But essentially, it's a godly world. And because it's a godly world, therefore, all the spheres, the 10 attributes there, that's the divine attributes, by and large. You say God's kindness is the kindness of Atzilus. You say God's intelligence is the intelligence of Atzilus. Okay. Now, in that context, of course, there are 10 spheres. But then the 10 spheres themselves, on the one hand, are quote unquote a creation of Hashem. A creation in the sense that, again, God himself doesn't have any definition. So any definitions, even if they're going to be godly definitions, are, by definition, created. Right? God has to choose to manifest certain definitions. But at the same time, because they're godly, they're going to be emergent from Hashem. They're not emergent from him, then it's not godly. It's a creation just like me. It happens to be a spiritual creation, but I'm also a creation. And so is a table. Right? It doesn't make any difference. So on the one hand, Atzilus is Yesh Ma'ayin. We spoke about the definition of that before. It's something from nothing on the one hand, because it's a created idea. These definitions that didn't exist before. On the other hand, they're godly, so they're emergent from Hashem himself. So how does that work? How does that work? So to that end, there's a level called Keser, which is why it's also kind of world, because it's also kind of a bridge also between the infinite and the finite. How so? And essentially it comes down something like this. The world of Keser is the world of Hashem deciding and wanting these definitions. So Hashem says, I want to manifest this. So Hashem says, I want to manifest X. I want to manifest intelligence. It's different than Hashem saying, I want to create a world. Hashem says, I want to create a world. So that world exists solely as a created being, distinct from anything that Hashem is. Obviously, Hashem is concealed in it and he's creating it, so on and so forth. But in terms of the nature of the world itself, it's not as if the matter of this table exists inside of Hashem, and then he extracts the matter from inside of it and puts it into a table. Right? I want to create a world, so the world is created. That's the way it is. When Hashem says, I want to manifest wisdom, what Hashem is saying is, I want wisdom to exist in me, and then I want to manifest it outward. Right? I want to manifest in me, and I want it to exist outward. So when you say Hashem, I want to manifest wisdom, I want to manifest intelligence, we're talking about Atak and Arach. When Hashem says I want to manifest any particular attribute, what Hashem is saying then is that he wants those things to exist in him and then to project them outward. Now, obviously, the way these things will exist within him and the way they project it outward are very different. Let's just think about that for a second. So let's just take one. Hashem says, I want to manifest wisdom. So wisdom as it exists once it's manifested is a defined, distinct wisdom. It has a certain function. So it's godly wisdom, but it has a function. Its function is to produce concepts, let's just say. Right? That's what Chachma does, it produces concepts. But then that same wisdom, in the notion, not of as it's manifest, but in Hashem's decision for it to be manifest, what does it look like? What does wisdom look like there? Once it's manifest, it looks like wisdom. But in Hashem's decision to manifest wisdom, what does it look like?
Oh.
Just a want,
Yeah.
just a desire on its own. It doesn't have a function of wisdom. It's a desire for it. So it exists there in some fashion because the wisdom that will then be produced is the result of that want for that wisdom to exist, right? But as it exists within the want, it doesn't exist as any particular definition. So this is definitions as they exist, subsumed in the infinite decision that they exist. Following? No? You follow that?
Not
No?
really. Well, not even.
Okay, so Hashem is infinite. Infinite by definition, ironically, means that there's no definition.
Okay.
Yeah?
Mhm.
And then there emerges from this infinite, in the world of Atzilus, a bunch of defined definitions, defined characters, defined personality, defined spheres, defined, they call them? Attributes, thank you. That's what I was looking for. Defined attributes. Chachma is distinct from Bina, which is distinct from Das, which is distinct from Chesed, and so on. Okay. They're not created, they're emergent. Which means if they're divine wisdom, it means it comes out of Hashem, this wisdom. Comes out of Hashem, this Bina. So does that exist in Hashem? Does the wisdom that existed in Hashem before it comes out of him? It exists in me. I am made up of all these different attributes. I am made up of Chachma, Bina, Das, and then they manifest in my heart and in my mind and everywhere else in my conscious existence. Right? Because they exist inside of me. I'm defined by them. I can't say that of God. He's defined by these things. He's not. So where do they come from? He makes a decision. He wants them. Right? It's a choice. I want to manifest Chachma, Bina, Das, etc., etc., etc. So before they even manifest, he has to, so to speak, or he does, so to speak, within himself decide what he wants to produce. Right? Okay. So in that desire, in that want that they should exist, do they have a distinct feature that Chachma is distinct from Bina? Once they're manifest, so Chachma has its role, Bina has its role, Das has its role, and they're distinct from each other. But Hashem's decision that they should be, they're distinct from one another?
The desire itself.
No, it's because I want them. There's one singular I want.
Yeah.
I want 10 different things, but all one singular I want. You could, in theory, find within the I want the distinction between one and the other, but the distinction is so nothingness. It's basically a singularity Hashem just wants. That point, Hashem says, I want to manifest these 10 spheres. That's the meeting point of the infinite and the finite. That the closest point, you want to zero it into the closest point, it's probably right there. Because the infinite says what I want. And then so you want, okay, you get to produce because you want, you can do whatever you want. And then right there, the infinite chooses to express a finite. That's really the world of Kesser. That's the world of Kesser. And it's called Kesser, a crown. Right? Kesser means a crown because it hovers above the head. Right? So it's not that it's not the functioning system itself that would begin from the head going downward. It's above. It's not completely detached from it. Levels beyond Hashem deciding to want to manifest anything are completely detached from any manifestation in Atzilus. Hashem's infinite, no decision, no nothing, just Hashem himself. When Hashem makes a decision, and I want to manifest certain things, that's already the infinite carving out within itself a finite potential. So it's the infinite, but it's close to the head already. It's already getting close to what's going to become and be the finite system of Atzilus. So that's Keser. It's the bridge between Atzilus and that which is beyond. Okay. Now, if we zoom into Atzilus, you have two components. And the way Chassidus puts it as follows. Every bridge, every intermediary has to have some component of each side that it's going to mediate between. Or it has to have a combination of the two. So Keser is going to have it has within it a part of it that's infinite and a part of it that's already finite. So the part that I described earlier, where Hashem says, I want to have these definitions, that's already linked to the finite. Right? Not finite yet, but it's linked to the finite. It's contained in it at least some potential for what's going to become the finite. Right? But then there's a part of it that's just infinite itself, receiving from the infinite at the higher level. Those two levels are referred to as Atik and Arich. Atik literally means removed. That's the higher level, like the part of Keser. That's what's called it's the end of the levels of Ein Sof. That's how it's referred to. It's like the lowest rung of the infinite, just before it touches the finite. And then Arich is already the finitude, or the potentiality for finitude. Arich means long. It's already coming down to something lower. That's Atik and Arich. It's within Keser itself. If you're splitting hairs inside of Keser, in this world where Hashem decides, I want to manifest infinite, or I want to manifest finite definition, you have these two components, the part that's infinite and the part that's ready to produce the finite. Atik Arif.
What's the zero?
Okay, let's get to in a second.
I'm just throwing out holistic things.
Yeah, 1 second. So now I want to just spend the last little bit just explaining a bit more what these two different levels are and the parallel in our own personal experience, right? Because as with everything, in understanding the way Hashem runs, because Hashem chooses to create man in his image, we have within ourselves something like this. Okay, now we don't have infinite to make decisions about what finite manifestations you want to have. We have a set manifestations that exist inside of us, and they're the ones that come out. That's it, right? Our souls are born with a certain blueprint of what kind of things that can be manifest, and that's the manifest. We could, as we spoke about, dig deeper, and I'm going to find within myself a higher level of chachma, fine, but I'm not going to create an 11th attribute. Never happening. I'm only going to be these 10, right? So to say that I have infinite, that manifest finite, doesn't really exist. But what I do have is, I do have within myself, going from non-defined me to defined me. That I have.
Why?
Because I exist as an I beyond any particular definition. I think, I want, I am intelligent. Who's the I? Not defined by any of these things. All these things will emerge from that I, but it's the I itself is actually beyond all these things. Right? So I'm locked and I can't choose to manifest now an 11th attribute. I can't do that. What I do have is a system by which there's an I that's not necessarily defined by all these things, that becomes defined by these things. Let me give the example and you'll understand what I'm talking about. So we said before that an arach, it's Hashem deciding, I want to manifest these things. Before want expresses itself outwardly, there's a level deeper than it, which is what I enjoy. What I enjoy. What I enjoy ends up being what I want. Right? You follow that?
Okay.
What I enjoy becomes what I want.
Mhm.
My delight, tainug, my pleasure in life becomes what I want.
Isn't there like
What's
a
the difference?
Chicken versus the egg.
Oh, so it's a chicken a little bit versus the egg, which is why actually in Chassidus there are a number of places where it has quite a few pages going back and forth. Which one causes what? Which one's higher? Want or enjoy, pleasure or delight, pleasure or want, desire.
Well, because
you can want something that causes you to have pleasure in something, or the reverse. I have pleasure in something, and if I want it. So Chassidus discusses at length. I'm not getting into explaining why, but there actually concludes. There makes this comment want. There comes want on that discussion. Sorry.
Want is first.
That the pleasure is first. Because even if want precedes pleasure in chronology, its function is to serve the pleasure, even if the want is what prompted the pleasure. So even in the scenario where the want comes first, it's going to be in the service of the pleasure that's derived from it, which means even as
So
want takes the lead, pleasure takes precedence.
Pleasure is within Kesser.
Yes. So what's the difference between pleasure and want? Pleasure is how I experience it myself. Want is how I get it from the world outside. So that's why it's that bridge. Pleasure, on the one hand, is how I experience myself. That's me on my own, beyond definition. This is the pleasure I have, that I am. The deeper pleasure is the pleasure of existing, pleasure of being understood, just the pleasure of being me. Because I have the pleasure of being me, therefore it ends up translating into a want that's already asking for things on the outside world.
But could you say,
So the higher level of Keser, Atik, is Hashem's pleasure of himself. And the pleasure of himself translates into I want, therefore a bunch of spheres. So it's the two ends of me experiencing myself, Hashem experiencing himself in the infinite, and that infinite choosing to want things on the outside, chesed, word, teferes, definitions that'll be manifest from it. Right? And that's Atik and Arich. Atik being the lowest end of the infinite, the pleasure of the infinite being, and then Arich being the beginnings of what becomes the finite. Okay, so the pleasure of your being is that you're going to manifest, you decide to manifest these 10 things, the want that's going to produce all these other 10 things that will come afterwards in Atzilus.
could you say then that the want is like the or and the pleasure is the keli?
Way around, maybe.
Oh, why so? I'm saying because the pleasure, like we're saying, is the personal aspect, that difference, that's different.
So that would be the or. Because it's the way I am, non-defined. And then then that's invested in wants, which are particular. You see,
Not the other way around. Because I'm
no,
saying,
in relation to you, in relation to, sorry?
Want is universal. Everybody wants things.
So is pleasure.
Yeah, but
Pleasure is also universal.
Pleasure, people experience different pleasures. And
People experience also different wants. But the pleasures, actually, the truth actually, you're right, because pleasure and want are actually both more universal than chesed, word, teferes, and so on. Right? Because once you get into the system, it's much more different. But when you go back to the self, that's non-defined, the I of me is not different than the I of you. When you say I and I say I, it wouldn't mean much.
Yeah.
When I say love and you say love, it would mean very different things. When I say I, right, so the closer you get to the I, the less distinct it's going to become, right? So I want to be much more similar, and I enjoy is going to even be more similar. Because I am enjoying being me. That's something that you also. The way it's going to express itself outward might be in different wants.
Yeah.
Right? So that's where the relative term, but relative to pleasure, want is a keli. Because it gives it distinction, it gives it definition, it gives it outwardly expression. As opposed to the pleasure, which is enjoying it myself.
Yeah.
Okay. So those are the two levels of that's Atik and Arich. They're two levels of the world of Keser. Keser being the bridge between the infinite non-defined, making a decision on producing finitude of Atzilus. And when you have that bridge, you're going to have two ends to it. One end, that's the infinite experience of it. That's Atik, parallel delight. And then there's that infinite, the way it starts to express its decision to produce something on the outside. That's already a want. That's the lower level of Keser, that's Arich. Those are two
You're gonna
levels.
see how those are manifested in the next book?
Not really.
No, okay.
Actually, not really. It's not, but it's a part of request.
Yeah.
And Zer Anpin, just very, very briefly, Zer Anpin is the Kabbalistic term for the emotional capacities from Chesed down to from Chesed. It's an acronym. So that's for Zer Anpin. So that's for Zer Anpin. Okay, why it's called Zer Anpin? Maybe not that.
I heard it's the little face,
Yes, literally, as opposed to Arich having the long face. Okay, you know what?
like the long bridge and the short.
Maybe Friday we'll get to that. Just saying earlier that we're going to continue, God willing, part 2 of Tanya, but maybe every Friday we'll dedicate to definitions. I'll try to make those definitions be connected to something we learned about that week.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Okay.
So we'll have to keep in mind Zer Anpin versus Arich Anpin, because the problem that will come up, I think. Okay, wonderful day, buddy.